Hello everyone, thanks for listening and welcome to this third episode in this special series for young farmers, introducing you to Kuhn Farm Machinery. My name's Ben Eagle and today we're talking about regenerative agriculture, which is certainly a buzzing term in agriculture at the moment. We're going to be talking about regen ag from both a livestock and an arable point of view, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Ed Worts, a product specialist at Kuhn UK, and Russ Carrington, who is manager at Knepp Regenerative Farms. Previously, he was general manager at the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, and he's a former chair of Young Farmers Agri Steering Group. Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming on. Ed, I'm going to turn to you first. What do we mean by regenerative agriculture?
So regenerative agriculture is really a farming system which aims to enhance the ecosystem on the farm. So it has a particular focus on soil health as well as water and nutrient management. Regen ag does have a few core principles such as minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing crop diversity, and also integrating livestock even in an arable situation. But there are many ways of achieving these goals, and it often depends on farmers' individual situations on how they approach regen ag. It's not a system that can really be switched on and off, and it does take time and perseverance to make regenerative agriculture work.
Brilliant. And for you, Russ, what do you think of when we say regenerative agriculture?
Well, I was just going to say that Dad stole my thunder, but I'll just agree with what he said. And I think the other thing to add is that actually for me, it's also about farming in a direction. It's about regenerating our landscape and year on year building on what we're doing, which is the opposite to degenerating and which leads to desertification. That's happening a lot around the world. And so it's flipping it in the other way. And it's even going beyond what we call sustainable farming. It's building on the status quo and actually improving and regenerating lots of different parameters all the time as we farm forward.
Brilliant. So we've got some definitions. Let's look at the practical side now. Looking at livestock first of all, so I'm turning to you, Russ. What are we thinking of when we talk about regen ag from a livestock perspective?
So as Ed mentioned, the integration of livestock into agriculture, regenerative agriculture, is really fundamental. And there's lots of different ways in which that can be done. And I suppose it comes back to what are we trying to regenerate and regenerating the soil, and how can we use those livestock as tools to help us to actually do that? So one of the ways is that we try and mimic how nature works and how grazing herbivores work in the great grasslands around the world, such as in the Serengeti or Great Plains of North America. And those animals are moving as mobs together, in large mobs together, and they're migrating over large areas. And they're only spending maybe 1, 2, or 3 days a year grazing a particular patch, and then they're moving on, but they're leaving behind their dung and their urine. And this is how grass plants have actually evolved to live. They've evolved to be grazed and munched off from time to time during the year, and then to be covered in dung and urine, and that excites the soil biology underneath, and then the grass plants respond to that, and they try again, fulfilling their life cycle of flowering and setting seed. And so what we can try and do in regenerative agriculture is in some ways mimic that system by using electric fencing or other forms of fencing and moving livestock in mobs or in their herds and moving them around the farm. And this starts to provide some good outcomes for the pasture and for soil. But what's more important there is actually the rest periods that soil and those fields get between grazing. So it's about how that's spaced out and moving away from sort of set stocking, where livestock are spread over an area and they're nibbling away at that grass all the time. That grass is never able to fulfill its life cycle and get more than a few inches or even millimeters high in some cases.
So in essence there, you're describing mob grazing. From a UK perspective, from a local perspective, what are some of the main advantages of doing that?
I think the biggest one is to do with soil health and how soil structure can be improved. As grass plants or pasture plants are allowed to fulfill their life cycles and grow tall, that activity above ground is mirrored below ground, and so the rooting depth can increase, and as part of that they can pump more organic matter into the soil, which means more carbon into the soil. That improves soil structure. It helps bring up other minerals and vitamins from within the soil profile. It helps to absorb more water, which helps in both drought situations and flooding situations. So I think that's a big fundamental of it. But going further on, it can bring benefits to animal welfare and animal health. That's been shown, with lower veterinary and medicine costs for farmers as a result. Ed mentioned that the part of increasing diversity is a big part of regenerative agriculture. Well, if you increase the diversity in pastures, that's good for wildlife, but it also increases the diversity of the diet for animals as well. So that it helps to improve their resilience.
What about livestock in winter? I mean, how do you deal with cattle, for example, in the winter if you're trying to keep them out as long as possible? And is poaching an issue, for example?
Yeah, so every farm is different, and some farms are able to outwinter relatively easily. Others are not, and there's nothing wrong with housing cattle during the winter months. But it's about working with what that individual farm can sustain. And over time, farmers are finding that as they improve soil structures, they improve the organic matter in the soil, they increase the holding capacity of that soil to take the weight of animals during wetter times. So that can lead over time to extending the grazing season, and even end up not even having to house at some times. And there's a lot that goes into that around stocking densities and around what the land can sustain. And of course, as you mentioned, any risk of poaching and what that might do. And there's lots of sort of different views on poaching, but it also depends on what the poaching's like. And a little bit of surface poaching is actually really, really good for the soil. It creates a little bit of disturbance. It helps new seeds and plants get established. Whereas if there are, the animals are actually up to their knees in mud, that's certainly not the poaching that we condone. So there's a balance, and that's down to the skill of the farmer to decide what's appropriate.
Okay, let's turn to the arable side now, Ed. So it's over to you. Clearly, cover crops are important here. So let's start with that. For anybody who doesn't know, what is a cover crop?
So a cover crop is usually made up of a number of species, different legumes and brassicas. They're planted in the soil in between a farmer's cash crops, like his combinables. And the reason for them is to improve the soil health. They're never really combined or harvested. Normally a cover crop will be fed to livestock or incorporated back into the soil in some way. So yeah, that's the basic.
Yeah. And what's actually happening to the soil when you're growing that cover crop, or when you're grazing it off, or when you're removing it?
Yeah. So as I said, a cover crop is normally made up of a multi-species, and the reason for having all these different species in there is to bring as many benefits to the soil as possible. So certain species of cover crop are there to encourage deep rooting, to improve the soil structure, while others can be there to improve nitrogen fixing, for example, and bring nitrogen and carbon back down into the soils.
And the end goal, what's the benefit of integrating a cover crop into your rotation rather than just focusing on cash crops, for example, or your traditional break crops?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so cover crops are there to enhance the soil in different ways. So by improving the soil structure, nitrogen fixing, carbon sequestration, the aim is always to improve the soils through more natural means rather than, say, mechanical or chemical applications. So instead of ploughing or using a subsoiler to relieve any compaction, sometimes a cover crop with deep rooting could actually alleviate that compaction that a farmer might have. Cover crops can also help with soil water holding capacity. So as many guys out there will be aware, our seasons are becoming much more extreme. So from extreme dry in the summer to very wet autumn and winters, where cover crops can improve and enhance the soil structure. It will it will then make the soils much more resilient to these wet and dry periods.
Yeah, and are we just talking about cover cropping when we're talking about regen ag in arable circles?
No. So cover crops are just one part of regen ag in arable farming. There's many different principles which can be adopted to achieve regenerative agriculture. So crop diversity is one part of it. So Russ talked about diversity as well. It's important for managing. So in arable, you can manage weeds with crop diversity. You can manage pests. So like aphids, if you have some crop diversity, you can encourage the predators into the crop there. And integrating livestock into the arable system is also a big part of regenerative agriculture. Eating the cover crops would be part of that. But the idea with integrating livestock is not to eat down all of the cover crop. A lot of farmers say the idea of integrating livestock is for the livestock to eat sort of 50, 60% of the crop, and the rest of it would be trampled into the soil. So it's crushing it down, and it will then be added to the organic matter levels within the soils.
Yeah, because so far we've sort of spoken to this of livestock and then arable, but clearly it is integrated. I mean, do you think that this is I'm interested in both of your views actually here, in whether it's particularly suited to mixed farming circles, but also whether there's opportunity here for particularly young entrants, younger farmers who might have some sheep, say, who can then work with arable farmers on more of a collaborative approach. Russ?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think it does lend itself to mixed farming systems, and that's a way which we can use those livestock to build the fertility to then growing the crops to feed humans directly. And so it's good to think about how we achieve that. But actually managing a mixed farm is a very challenging thing these days. It requires such a vast range of specialist skills in each crop area. And so can we work differently as farm businesses? And it's something we're exploring here down at the Knepp estate, is can we collaborate as individuals who then run the different enterprises on the farm. So overall we have a mixed farm, but individuals are responsible for different enterprises that are integrated with one another.
We've learned in previous episodes with the rest of your team, Ed, that Kuhn puts a great amount of emphasis on product development and research. How is Kuhn working to help farmers interested in regen ag techniques?
So Kuhn are a machinery producer, but yeah, we're always looking for solutions to help farmers improve and work with them to design machines which can help them achieve their goals.
Yeah.
So part of the regen ag system is minimizing soil disturbance. Yep. So naturally direct drilling comes into that. We recently relaunched the direct drill about 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. So we do have that machine available to achieve the minimizing soil disturbance part of regen ag. We also identified the crop diversity part of regen ag. So on our drills now, we can have a minimum of 2 hoppers and sometimes up to 3. So that's allowing farmers then to mix different species of cover crops together in sort of creating their own homemade mixes really to suit their systems. So yeah, we've identified that we need to be as adaptable as possible and provide machines which can help farmers achieve their goals.
And if someone is interested in trying something in terms of regen ag but not sure where to start, what advice would each of you give them? Ed, I'll start with you.
In terms of arable, as I said earlier, regen ag is not a system which can be sort of switched on and switched off. It does take a number of years to get into the system and to start to see the benefits of it. In the first few years, the farmers may feel they're putting a lot of effort into this and not seeing much return, but it does take a few years to regenerate the soil health and to start seeing those returns. So I would say just take a small area of your farm and start the regenerative agriculture process on just one or two fields, perhaps, just so you're not diving straight in and going for it wholesale, because regen ag does take a bit of trial and error and perseverance.
Yep.
So what you might try a few different things on one or two fields, and then adopt those systems on an increased area over the farm once you know what works and what doesn't work for your particular situation.
And Russ, this is in many ways a mindset shift. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think the mindset shift is really crucial. And I've, in my former role with the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, worked with a lot of farmers wanting to go through this transition, actually supporting them make that shift. And it's really interesting to kind of see what's involved to help that mindset to change. And a lot of it's to do with sort of confidence, having a go, trialing things, as Ed said, but it's also about other people in the farming community coming on board and showing what's possible, being an example, and then openly talking about it. And I think that's really one of the most important things, because in some communities it's sort of very forbidden in some ways to do something different, in a way that the tradition's always been done. So someone changing something is unbalancing the status quo, and that does cause, and I have come across issues that's caused within rural communities. So I think this the sort of peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer support is really important. So within the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, there's a really good sort of members forum where there's digital support to one another. There's some really good WhatsApp groups around at the moment, like the UK's mob grazing WhatsApp group, where there is that sort of shared journey, shared support going on. But then there are events like the Groundswell Agriculture event, which hopefully is back on this year.
Let's hope
really
so.
good places where you can go and learn and see other people doing this stuff.
Super. Well, that's all we have time for, but a huge thank you to Ed and Russ for joining me. On behalf of YFC and Kuhn, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast, and please do give it a share on your socials. Don't forget that there are 2 other episodes to listen to, one on quality forage and one on career opportunities at Kuhn, and you can find both of those and much more on YFC's YouTube channel. But for now, from here, it's goodbye from me, Russ and Ed. This podcast was presented and produced by Ben Eagle for the National Federation of Young Farmers Clubs. It featured Ed Worts and Russ Carrington and was supported by Kuhn Farm Machinery.